So sharing my screen right now, hopefully everyone can see this. I really want to introduce back Dr. Mike Gaskell. You're here, right, Mike? Okay, great. And we also have Dr. Michael Salvatore, who's superintendent of Long Branch Public Schools. Delighted to have him with us.
Excited to be here too. Thanks for the introduction.
Yeah. So we're gonna have a good sort of, positive direction conversation about what you're doing now and also into the future. I have questions for you guys about real digital transition and meaningfulness for this hour. I'm going to share my webcam so you know who's speaking. And then I think we're waiting on Guillermo Tejeda. He was with us in the spring doing some awesome work there. And then Dr. George Solter. So I'll try to watch my panel for when they come in so we can have them join us in the conversation today. You guys are also free to share your webcams if you'd like to. I'm going to make sure that that's, yep, unmuted. Yeah, there you are. Okay, good. So I'm Leilani Coffin, CEO of Learning Council, a news, media, and research organization working from Smoky, California today. We can barely breathe when we walk outside. It's kind of a wild moment for us, but really glad to have you join us, and also on Dr. Gaskell. So really what we want to find out first from you, Michael, is kind of an abbreviated version of what's happening. And then I want to get into some sort of, conversation about the future.
Sure, I think it's.
Oh, not Michael. Sorry.
I don't know. Again, Michael, you can go first.
No, you got seniority. Go ahead.
I guess I'm the old guy. All right, is that what it is?
No, I meant superintendent. Go ahead.
Thanks, Michael. I think the question is like, what's not going on right now? I mean, schools for us in New Jersey, and Michael, you're here in New Jersey too. It is a whole mixed bag of nuts right now. You've got people in hybrid, people virtual. You've got people coming back in half speed and full speed, and I'm watching, and those who are opening, Michael, if that's one of you, if you're one of those districts, which I think you are, I'm cheering for you on the sidelines. I'm in a remote setting right now. Everybody who's with me here wants the kids back. The energy is just missing. But when we look at districts like East Brunswick, other districts that are opening, we're a bit envious, but at the same time, when we're hearing cases pop up of COVID, we're a little nervous too, because right in Monmouth County, a couple districts today shut down because of a positive case. And I guess that's the environment we're in.
So I was asking one of my fellow organizers to make sure I keep on time because I can't see a clock while I'm on, and we have to move my phone away from the panel because otherwise it disrupts. It's kind of wild. So I'm like, what time is it? Okay, so yeah, I think we unfortunately are not going to have George with us today. I'm just getting notified that he had to cancel, but we did hear from all of his staff that are doing such innovative things this morning from North Bergen, so that was awesome. And maybe Guillermo will also join us later in the hour. So here's what's really happening, just to frame the conversation for you. The national research is showing that we did some valiant work as a country, and you guys particularly were kind of in a war zone, more than other areas of the country. But the research is showing, there's a huge attrition moment. There's AWOL kids in spring. They just didn't show up at all. And then there's been this massive attrition. We had a district say this the other day. They had 17,000 kids. They lost 4,000 going into fall. So it's a competitive moment. What I loved hearing Michael Gaskell say earlier is that, he has his eye on marketing, the PR of the moment and how to really reach families and make that connection and do everything that, what you can do. But at the same time, people are still jumping ship. So, that means that we have to sort of level up the game. So, Michael Salvatore, can you share sort of your leadership view of that first, and I'm going to have the other Michael also share. We got Mike 1, Mike 2.
Sure. So we're seeing a trend too in downward enrollment. So we're about 240 kids less than we were last year at this time. And what does that mean? More specifically, our 3-year-olds that typically come in around 400 kids per grade level, most of them are coming from that group. And I get it. As a parent, signing your child up for a 3-year-old experience when you've never been to school before is kind of frightening, especially if it's in this COVID or virtual environment. But I like that you use that phrase in terms of marketing, because we've got to sell and really believe in this safety components we're putting out there. We've all invested so much money and time and energy to make sure our staff are safe with the return that we better market it well, or else they're not going to show up. Especially those who have a choice. I mean, I'm looking at private schools open full day. And for a working parent, they're like, hey, I'm going to sign my kid up right next door if it means going back to work or not. So we're looking at it now, and we're being very strategic in making sure we get those families. We want them back. We want them in our October 15th count. That's a priority for us. And we want to make sure we're not just getting them back just to get dollars. We're getting them back because there's a gap in learning that's occurring right now, continue from the spring. And if we don't make it up, I'm not going to paint that the sky's falling, but it's certainly going to be harder to overcome if we get them back later than sooner.
Yeah, yeah. This is really a conundrum, and particularly for one of the hardest hit areas of the country. It's, it's like this perfect storm of everything happening at once. All right, so Mike Gaskell, what are your thoughts on the same sort of concerns?
Yep, and I was just taking in what the other Mike was saying. It's interesting, from Central Jersey, the perception of Long Branch is beach and growth. I mean, there's this perception that it's kind of a booming town, and yet here he is describing that because of the circumstance we're in, he's got less kids. That almost sounds like a dichotomy that he's managing over there. So I can only imagine, the kind of challenges you're up against in terms of that. And, similar kind of things. We had more kids go on like home instruction and things like that than I think we'd normally see. East Brunswick is pretty well reputed, so people generally don't leave this community while they're in school. But certainly this is the kind of circumstance where we'll see that increased. And like Mike was saying earlier, whenever there is anything that hits the news about somebody being COVID positive or something, or being near someone COVID positive, it's causing these kids, their families, to say, hey, listen, we need to go all virtual. So like I mentioned earlier, when I was on earlier, we have a 25% hybrid model, which is really half of that, because the governor allowed families to choose a fully virtual option. So about half our families chose that, which means we're only seeing about 12.5% of our kids on any given day, which is, I mean, I have a building of 1,500 kids, and there's, a lot less than that every day. So, so it really creates an interesting scenario where, on the one hand, it's like we could definitely get more kids into this school, but then there's that perception that Mike was describing, which is really substantive in this area, which is, oh my gosh, the fear factor, and the potential for those that have a comorbid situation. And I mean, and then of course the social media runs wild, right, Michael? And you say, wait a minute, here's the facts, and you try to really stay ahead of that, which of course is a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, like I said, the perfect storm for you guys. So then we get into, you market into like confidence, right? But then there's also the transition, right? Like, how valuable is the interaction, the user interface, user experience of aligning to your school now? So you kind of had to go from 0 to 60 in like 5 seconds flat in terms of like devices, software and all the other stuff. And the leveling up is not going to end. Because right now, the Learning Council has been watching the consumer markets since this started. We've been tracking the consumer markets for the last 7 years, and what the spend was in America on digital learning things, disassociated from online schools, and not not just books, but the purchase of software directly and all that other, apps that teach you the alphabet and all that stuff. It was already over $1 billion more than all K-12 spends before quarantine, put together in the United States. So the consumers in America were already, figuring out high value learning that is basically teacherless before. And then quarantines hit and it jumped by almost $1 billion, at least from what we can see off the app markets. And then our calculations of what's going on with the companies that are doing it, directly. ABC Mouse is one of the big dogs in that hunt, and they already had $1 billion valuation. And the spend in this area, just watching the investment community, is unbelievable. They think, and some of them are sort of doing little party dances about it, that it's over. They're kind of having little celebration moments. I don't really agree with that, because the one thing that I know the American mind is still really, committed to is human interaction. So it's the hybridization. It's the how you do the logistics while wrapping in higher and higher and higher value digital user experience that is quality. It's not like, where's the document again? And no, it's the animated, fully fun fest learning that is, scientifically motivated and all other stuff. So it's logistics, it's time and space and how you're using it artistically to intersect the teacher in the exact right moment. It's a long run. So talk to me about sort of like where your leadership is going, what you're thinking with in terms of this mountain, because this is not a small mountain. There's some places in the country that is sort of almost at the pinnacle, but even the Edu Jedi, from our view, nobody's there yet. There's nobody there. The online schools aren't there with the human interaction. And you guys are coming from the other direction, quality human interaction, but maybe you have a long ways to go on the digital side. So who wants to go first? Michael, Salvatore, I'm seeing maybe, are you ready? Are you ready? Let's have you go first.
So much to say.
So much. Okay, good.
First of all, when you started talking about the digital market right now, we were one of the groups too that jumped and looked for a platform that was adaptive, that you can personalize, that can differentiate, all the fun buzzwords. We looked for that. And that's a huge market. We spent some money there. We spent some money in devices too. We also continue to spend money on wireless access for families, putting hotspots in homes. Right now, we are in over 1,450 homes with paying for those devices monthly to give to tether into, give a hotspot. So that's saturated. I mean, we've spent a ton of money in that area, and we still, just like everybody else, are waiting for Chromebooks to come someday, right? They're on a ship somewhere, they're coming. But if you jump into the other piece, which you mentioned about school being proposed to be exclusively digital, that's never going to happen in a way that's truly unique. I mean, schools are like the most unique social system that exists, and they thrive on that interaction. So you can't simply replace it with the tech. If it could, we'd all be out of business very quickly in this environment. And I think if anything, this environment is proving you need to be in a setting that allows you to discover, to explore. I mean, I walked into a classroom yesterday. It was a self-contained special education class, preschool. And this teacher, who's awesome, was almost in tears as she's on the screen with 6 children in her classroom. Their families are there. She's almost in tears because she cannot connect to them. And this is a teacher who thrives on connecting, on the proximity, on the prodding, on the prompting, all the good little tricks that teachers have. And the parents, they're saying, how do we get our kids to learn? How do we get them to focus? So, and that's the most extreme case. Now flip it on its head and take a look at your advanced learners, your gifted ones. The gifted learner, everybody thinks they're the overachiever. They're not. They're typically distractible too. They're looking at a full Zoom screen with 20 faces, and they're looking at your background, your pictures, who's got glasses, who's got a skirt on. I mean, that environment is really distracting for your gifted learners. And then, so who does it work for? It works for the typical 10th grader who wants to watch a YouTube video on 4 times speed so they can get through it quick. You know, this environment can expose you to content, but it's not going to get you deep into the woods of that content. You really need to have that physical interaction. So the thought of going out of business and selling to a tech company, it's not going to happen. Schools are going to exist, not just because we're brick and mortar, because there's a whole life and energy inside of each building.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that, but I kind of go to that mindset of, wait a second, there's something here. So there's
Oh, yeah.
something over here. There's something over here, and just raising a little bit of a red flag. Hey, check this out. This is how do we mesh these two? So that's really what I'm pointing at is just like the meshing, the logistics of that, and the sort of leveling up. It's a trajectory everybody's sort of on. Okay, Mr. Gaskell, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I couldn't agree with Michael more about, I mean, we're a social institution. I mean, I was like head bobbing the whole way. And, I think we proved that when there was this clear gap last spring where it was like, wow, you mean we're not going to, we're not going to socialize, we're not going to be near each other. So when this, when we're in some variation of back to normal, we'll be back in schools. I have no doubt in my mind about that. So, but as far as like, I think what you were saying is more like the integration piece. Like, how do you carry some of the things that I call it carrying it out of the pandemic? How do you carry some of the tools out? One of those to me is snow days. We should never have a snow day again. Um, this is actually something my superintendent Michael's pushing hard with the state. And really, I mean, we have the infrastructure now, so why are we even talking about it? We live in an area of the country where there's snow and there's ice, and we get snow days, and there's really no need to adjust the calendar. If Michael's a superintendent, that means he's had to deal with calendar nightmares and graduation and all that good stuff. And enough. I mean, that's just one quick example of how you can take what we gained from this experience and can migrate. Now, that's a holistic view of it. But as far as like individual things, I was talking a little bit about this earlier, that teachers have new tools in their arsenal. A kid's absent, but they can still do the work that day. When we're back to normal, why not let them? I mean, obviously we don't want kids deathly ill doing work, but if they're sort of just they have pink eye or something and they can still do work because they're otherwise fine, let them do the work. I mean, why would we hinder that now that we have the tools and resources? And the teachers have been able to gain the confidence by being thrust into this in ways that no PD could have ever given them. This was like real-time PD. This was like held to the fire PD. And sometimes we don't ask for it or want it, but that's sometimes the best way to learn and utilize tools. So all of those tools that I see as resources, I see teachers making more video tutorials. I installed a Ring at my house, which my wife would tell you I'm the most, inept in terms of just working around the house, because I watched a YouTube video. I know how to install a Ring video device at my house because I watched you. So we should be doing more of these kinds of tutorials for kids. My daughter had a lot of math videos last year. They were great. I'm like, why didn't I have these when I was a kid? Well, I didn't have them when I was a kid because I was too old. But certainly these are the kinds of tools we should be carrying out of the pandemic. And by the way, while teachers are creating lessons because they see the same grade next year unless they loop, they should be archiving these and referring back to them when they say, well, I made this great video way back in June of 2020 that would fit this thing. And they can replace their, other supplemental instruction with that. So there's all these tools that I think they should be thinking about it. To me, that's the next step of PD after we get out of this, is how are we going to utilize some of the resources we learned about?
Michael, let me jump in on that, because you said, like, you talk about even attendance. So, I mean, attendance impacts our funding now. Why in the world would we have a kid who potentially couldn't make it to school? I know you're in middle school, but elementary kids don't make it to school because of their parents, most of them. It's not really because it's so the kid's attendance is a mark of their parents' punctuality and time management. But there's a lot of innovation, Leilani, that you're kind of alluding to here. For us, we over the summer, we had over 300 kids involved in a virtual summer school. And I'm saying 300 pretty consistent. And we worked through these small group instruction, kind of like a guided reading, guiding math. And we were getting really personalized information, and we were able to see growth. We kind of replicated a marking period. We started last, like June 10th, we finished. We started the Monday after, went right through the summer, recouped 40 days. And those kids are better off now than they were. And we just gave a half day of targeted instruction. We started something recently. We started last night for the first. It was a night school for parents, and it was if you went to virtual school during the day and you had to put your kids with your in-laws or your mom or relatives that don't speak English, you can tune in at night, and a teacher in your grade level is going to reteach the lesson so that you could watch it at night after your workday. Those
Mhm.
are ideas we never. That's good for a normal situation. We don't have to be in a COVID environment to really maximize the technology and to really leverage our staff in a way that they can share. You can take your best teacher and really you could scale them up so that every parent can see your best teacher in action. So, and then I think the therapy and services, Leonie, we have kids that are being pulled out of classrooms still in 2020. So they're missing their favorite special or their favorite subject, or they're missing a subject they struggle in so they can get related services. Now,
Mhm.
with teletherapy, there should be no reason why we can't extend the day beyond the 2:30 or 3 o'clock, where we can connect to kids even in the evening in their own home with their parents there to help support them. It would be even better. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for innovation in this environment.
Yeah, a lot of opportunities. So I'm watching you, and what I'm seeing is that your mind has been unboxed for both of you. It's like it's now dimensional into these technology realms to utilize and have a different sort of service structure. So let me take you one step further. This is what we're seeing happen nationally. So for example, Lammersville ISD in California, they had a high school where they decided to change their structure, and they have rolling drop-offs in the morning, and students can take a class course. This is high school, you can't do this with littler kids, but they had rolling drop-offs, and then in the middle of the day, 2 full hours of office time for all the teachers to manage those students who wanted to be almost full-time remote. And then they could come in to meet with a teacher, or they could have a video conference meeting with the teacher, but they have larger blocks, which is actually the mode that we see happening nationally almost everywhere. Almost every school district in the nation has gone to large block schedules so that you could have a little bit of instruction and then these big giant windows of asynchronous with needed teacher interaction woven in there for all the individuals. So Lammersville went beyond that, and logistically, because they were now sort of picturing themselves as prescribers, like a doctor prescribes, here's your, medicine you need. Instead of being the purveyors only, they're the prescribers of your path, right? So that means maybe some of the path you're doing on your own in a sort of homeschool universe of, I got to get these standards done. I'm not going to do it the way they're prescribing exactly. I'm not going to take that menu item. I'm going to go do this one by myself, but they're going to test me. So that disaggregation of role, but still being the seat time, right? In California, there's a certain number of hours you have to be on campus, so they can fulfill that. I don't really know New Jersey well enough to know what your seat time laws are, but the disaggregation of the menu so that they could pull in all the homeschoolers is what Lammersville did. They got 99% back because they started to look at themselves as a menu of interactivity and different layers and all that other stuff. So what do you think about that in terms of where that could go for you guys in New Jersey? Michael Salvatore, you want to go first?
I just spoke. I pass it over to Mike. Yeah.
Okay, so Michael Gaskell. Okay.
So just start over with that because I want to make sure I understood you correctly.
So menu time, cataloging yourself. So now you have, here's your requirements in math, here's your requirements in language, here's this is what you could check off. If you want to opt out of that, you still have to take the tests. And here's what you have to complete, right? It's sort of a general menu item. Just like when you're doing a pacing guide, now in that moment of the schedule, the student has the option to be remote and do it themselves, be remote and still be tethered to the whole group structure and class and teacher structure, or they're doing it, they're figuring it out on their own. But on the other topics, science and language. Maybe they're fully tethered to you. So it's starting to think with the disaggregation of your own menu so that it has functional difference in terms of how you're administering it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so speaking from a middle school educator's perspective, this might be viable for upper secondary. I wonder though, kids don't know what they don't know, or they're still discovering and they're still exploring. And a lot of the creative kinds of courses at this level are exploratory. And then they realize, oh my gosh, they had a great teacher or whatever. I learned something I never knew was great that I'm into. And so I would caution against that kind of menu option discourse with this level. It's something that sounds really interesting and possible, and it would depend on the community and the support of local districts for, I would say, like 11th and 12th grade, though. So
Yeah.
I think that's how I'd kind of break it up.
Okay.
So this concept is something I put some thought into a couple years ago, and it was the idea that school would be like a playlist for a kid that could change, right? That can alter according to your mood of the day or what's available. And the concept is around what you're talking about. It's almost like a picture of a really good conference where you walk up to the board and be like, okay, what are the conference sessions today? And then you literally choose the conferences you're going to. But you have certain rules, Mike, where it's like, okay, you have to take a humanities class and a math class and a science class and a language arts class. But in these subcategories, you're like, oh, Mr. Gaskell or Dr. Gaskell's in room 105 today. He's awesome. I'm going to go. He's going to speak about the earth, and I'm going to go see that for my science today. I mean, that concept is awesome because you would, logistically, it's really hard to pull off because we've got standards, we've got assessments, but if you stripped us of certain things and allowed it to be more free-forming based upon someone's real interest, I mean, that's what we all like going to. I like going to a conference where I can stare at the digital board of the app and be like, yeah, no, okay, yeah, I'm going to hit these two today. If learning like that in the secondary level, if we could able to create that environment, you would have some really motivated kids, and you probably would see better results. It's like, for me, I like to read books that are not even close to the books my wife likes to read, but it doesn't mean I'm not reading. She looks at the books I'm reading and says, that's boring. Who wants to read about more facts? And I like that stuff. She wants to read a story, okay? But that's if school could be more like that, more customizable, I think you'd have more buy-in. I know it would take a full culture to be created around that concept, which is pretty intriguing now.
Yeah, a lot of mutation. Okay, so let's just go back to another sort of facet to round out our time here, and that is the fact that as you move into more and more digital transition, if you break down what is actually happening at the teacher level, it's a lot. It's a ton. And you start out, it's like, great, Google Docs, we're using this stuff, or we're using an LMS. It's still sort of focused on the distribution model being the teacher. But so there's a dashboard, and the teacher's like, this is great. I can see kind of what's happening. Did they do their lesson? Did they turn in their assignments? Like, it's kind of simple. Superintendents, principals, you guys are watching your own dashboards. And then other stuff starts happening, and that is this, moment where some kids are remote, and now it's like you're on Zoom meetings and you're trying to calculate what's going on. So another level of complexity. And then you also start getting other software in. Some of the software might be the adaptive digital curriculum kind that has its own internal dashboard because it's watching how fast kids are getting through ST Math. Or Alexia reading, and then you got to have a teacher go check that dashboard and try to triangulate that data with the other data they're seeing in LMS, and then you get more of it, and then you get more of it, and then you get to be Houston ISD, who has 2 million digital learning objects in their library, and it's wild. They're sort of starting to corral some of that now, but you literally have an ongoing sort of growth. And when you step back as leadership and you look at the burden on the teachers, you start to say to yourself, I got to take something off this racehorse, because they're still doing all the class discipline. They're still doing everything, you know, that they're supposed to be doing as teachers in terms of like the lesson planning, the curating of the information, da 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 da. Now I got analytics, I got data entry on them, and I got a bunch of other stuff on them. It's a lot. So what are your thoughts about where it's going to go for you in terms of that particular thing? What are you hearing from your teachers?
Mike, you want to jump in first?
You keep giving it to me, huh? You know, I think I've said this before, but you know, I think the teachers are going to be able to take a lot of this with them when we get back into a normal or a closer to normal version of what we're doing. And like Mike said, schools are social institutions, and I don't doubt that we'll be back. It's just that it's that transition and that jump. During this experience, I think they're going to be, look, a lot of these tools were introduced to them or were available before, but who the heck knew the term Zoom before March? Honestly,
I know, nobody.
Unless you were like a business manager or something, you didn't deal with Zoom or Zoom bombing or whatever else is going on. So, you know, these are all new to us as educators, but not necessarily in a bad way. I mentioned snow days before and eliminating that. And also, you know, I was thinking about when Michael was talking about that option to, hey, you can go to one of these 3 classes kind of thing and pick your poison. I was thinking about like that ed camp style model. Like that's the kind of thing that I've always wanted to try to figure out for kids that we now do with faculty, and they love it. So why wouldn't we, you know? So those are the kind of things that, you know, and again, Michael hit it on the head. The scheduling component of that is the problem, and the standards. We got to make sure we're hitting standards. So are those standards too rigid? Do they need to be reevaluated? Those are some of the things that may have to happen before you can start to explore creative things like that. And maybe it's a circumstance like this that will start to push those kinds of options forward. I always like to say though that, and I spoke complimentary of our State Department about how they offered a recovery plan model. But one of the criticisms I give them is they need to have more educators, practitioners, having a say in how we do things, because I think some of the suggestions you came up with here with that kind of flexibility would be embedded into some of the options and make, you know, learning more interesting. And like Michael said, would appeal more to different kinds of learners, right? Everybody knows about the learner who can sit in a row and take great notes and does well on tests. That's only one small portion of our reality. You know, if we keep forcing kids into that box, especially with all these tools we have now, these new digital tools, we should be looking at these options. So I think it's going to happen. I hope it doesn't. I hope we don't get back to normal and go, okay, we're back to normal, and take out your pencil and we're not going to do anything digital, you know, because that would be a mistake. Again, you know, the teacher is the primary mechanism for the kid learning. That hasn't changed, and I don't expect it to. You know, we're not going to have robots teaching, at least not for a very long time, not long after I'm gone. And so I think we need to think about how those teachers can utilize resources to make them more effective and to make the lesson more engaging.
Yeah, these are, you know, I'm just putting out the provocateur sort of dialogue for you guys because of all the trends that we're watching. And you know, Learning Council's been on the road for 7 years. We're so sad we couldn't see you guys live in person this year. You know, North Bergen was going to host us this year and have everybody come down for like an actual workshop where we could play our, you know, future of digital logistics board game. Everybody's a human game piece on this 20 by 30 foot mouse pad thing. It was going to be awesome. And then we had this happen. So now we're doing things virtually. We don't get to play the game, but unfortunately, no, to just sort of provoke your thought, you know, and say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Because, you know, we used to get around, now we're just getting around virtually, talking to people and like what they're actually doing. And some of the models are fascinating. You know, it's like, you're doing what? Well, holy cow, fully personalized learning. How do you do that? How's these logistics even work, right? How much teacher centricity are you still maintaining? Or have you somehow disaggregated it so that the teacher is in a service structure mentality, just swooping in like a SWAT team to do direct instruction only? Or are they still lecturing on everything? Is lecture still like really viable? So There's all kinds of questions and answers. I think this is the most exciting moment in education in the last 100 years. I really do. I think it's going to be like electrifying. But my real concern is, let's not go back to normal, like you just said, Michael, Dr. Gaskell, and let's try to level up. Let's take this somewhere exciting and new. Okay, Superintendent Salvatore, your thoughts on this?
I think we're fully aligned. But there's the cliche, the term that's very popular now, but I do think there's a place for it, is social emotional learning. In this tech world, we realize that the gritty diagnostic data, we can extrapolate that in different ways. We should use all the tools for that stuff. If you're using LinkedIn or any other platform or program, there's a ton out there. You should use those tools to do the gritty work. So you don't have to identify your level of learners or to collect information. But when it comes down to mechanisms to manage stress, to get people over a hump like this period of time, teachers really can go back to the basics to facilitate these strategies. And I'm watching teachers, and Michael, you're probably seeing this too. You're in school now, and teachers are typically, as a mold, many are type A and they want to do good. I mean, they're rule followers. So just tell me the rules, I'll follow the rule. Just don't let me make up the rules unless it's my classroom. Like, just tell me the rules. And right now they're having a tough time. They're getting anxious because the game has changed a little bit. And they're not sure on how to project their energy through a camera. They're not sure how to extrapolate information or to connect with kids, right? That personal connection through the screen. So they're unsure of themselves. And if we're looking at that SEL approach, we have to look at it, that L as in leadership, social emotional leadership. How do we as superintendents and principals apply the same strategies and theories to our staff so that we teach them to overcome the hardships, the changes they're facing, and maybe like we keep hearing new normal, but let's just say whatever we come back to when this is over, hopefully it is completely different. And hopefully they have these strategies in place so they can embrace that and not look in the rearview mirror and keep saying, I remember how it was so good. Maybe say now, listen, I can use technology to really hone in on particular skills and strengths, and use platforms that have machine learning so that they are predictive and that kids can learn at their own pace in the four walls of a classroom.
Yeah, so it's a really great point that you're making, and I want to end off with comments from both of you about the social emotional side, because the gift that we've been given, and it's a strange one, is the fact that we've now had everyone in our school communities go through a mutual experience, and it's kind of like going to war. Like I said that before, war is a horrible word, but they've been through something together, and they've probably coalesced into a more high affinity group than we know. As they come back into school, they all have this shared mutual human experience that makes them a group, right? So that's a gift. And so speak to me about, the healing moment and how you're going to use this as you go forward to, really create your community. Dr. Gaskell, I think you're next up, and then we'll wrap up.
When you said that, I immediately went to, trauma and recognition of trauma. Like, in some way, many, if not most kids were traumatized by this experience. Just by very nature being removed from their social environment, they have experienced a tremendous amount of trauma. I have kids that are of school age, and they were really disappointed to hear that, they were going to start virtually, and they don't know when this is going to end. So that adds to anxiety and reinforces trauma. So we're schools, and as schools, yes, we need to address the academic function, but equally important is this, traumatic experience and the anxiety that's brought on by it. So how do we do that? And I think a lot of this has to do with teachers getting a lot of PD on understanding SEL. We were starting to look at this, and we've heard of different ways of addressing SEL, and there's been lots of research out there. We were just starting to really tap into this the last few years, and I think of things like restorative justice and some of the techniques there. these are kind of the things that I think inevitably have to be part of our instructional repertoire. And teachers aren't counselors and are not psychologists, but I think they need to see some of the warning signs and be trained in those warning signs, whether those are passive warning signs or, you know, obviously in their face. The obvious in the face ones are easy to recognize and they're quickly referred. But, you know, I think the ones that I worry about are the quiet, you know, kid in the corner who's really suffering. And so we have to be able to recognize this and then, you know, harness some PD skills to address that trauma, do a lot of short-term kinds of assessment, both academic and emotionally, and then give them some supports and show them in small wins kinds of steps that they're progressing, because everything about, you know, the human experience in terms of growing and feeling good about yourself is making those small wins, those small steps upward, and knowing that there's going to be setbacks along the way, but encouraging them with that progress in that process. So I think that's how you look at that piece of it.
Good, excellent comments. Superintendent Salvatore.
Sure. I could speak on this topic for days because I believe in it and I love it. But and I'm reading a book now called The Resilience Project, and it's really interesting. But they focus on 3 different areas, and one of them is gratitude. Of really having appreciation for the things you have. I know if I had a nickel for everybody who said, I'd hate to be in your shoes, right? I hear that all the time. Oh, I don't want to be a superintendent right now. It's a crazy time to be a superintendent. I hear that all the time. But I say, well, I'm actually just really grateful that I'm in a position right now to be able to lead, to make decisions that are really impactful during a very challenging time. And I think if we all can have a bit more gratitude for the things that we have in life and the decisions we can make, we would have a different perspective of that. And that allows us to be kinder to other people and connect to other people, and even in small gestures. But the secondary piece of that is being empathetic. And I think as we look at the civil unrest in the world right now, and the ability to look through somebody else's eyes and experience is so important. The term polarized is certainly one we've heard throughout 2020 and before that, and probably through every election period. But this polarization means one side and another, and we need to be able to cross the aisle, to look through somebody else's eyes, to see what it's like to be in their shoes, if we're ever going to make any really meaningful progress. And then the last piece is just that mindful approach to being in this moment right now with you, hearing what you're saying, taking it in and making it an experience, not just another calendar event. And I think if we all take a look at those 3 areas and that approach, we will be more mindful. We'll be better socially and emotionally in terms of leaders. And then we're able to address those issues like Mike talked about, trauma. So when it comes out in the form of somebody being overly controlling, because it's not just necessarily somebody coming out and saying, I had a traumatic event. It's usually the behaviors we're seeing where they're sort of stop eating, they're isolating, they're not speaking anymore. Then if we take care of ourselves, we're grateful, we're empathetic, we're mindful, then we can address those concerns in other people, especially those traumatic concerns. So I hope everybody marches this march in terms of social emotional leadership and understands how important it is, because we all know if a kid's hungry, it's going to be a tough day at school. But if their mind is not right, it's going to be even more difficult. So we've got to make sure they have what they need. And I think that mindful piece is certainly part of it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad your students have you. I'm glad for, both of you, because you're aware of these sorts of issues. You're not just sort of, going to do the same old kind of thing going forward. I think we only have a few more minutes here, and I feel like we've sort of exhausted you now. Like I put you through the ringer on all your questions. It feels like you guys are on 60 minutes, I'm sure. But that's kind of the nature of the Learning Council. We're out there being provocative and helping, people think about some of the things that we're seeing in other places. And I think I might have mentioned this before. We had 27,000 survey responses before we started this tour. We knew what was going on. We knew that number one was student motivation, this healing, this trauma moment. And then also, what are the logistics like? Because this is crazy time. Like, just like New York's logistics, they put out there 6 different plans. It's like AB week, AB day, ABCD day, and like it was kind of wild. And that's happening all over the place. So I'm going to check here, see if we have anybody who's typed in questions. Anybody who wants to ask questions, don't be shy right now because I'm going to be ending off here. And then I just want to really say thank you guys. Thank you for being who you are, you know, and for leading. And I feel sort of like I'm making myself out to be the queen, but, you know, I see a lot, you know, Learning Council sees a lot. So it's my duty to say, you know, thank you from the Edu Jedi Leadership Society and Learning Council for being valiant and for, you know, leading in this moment and rushing in and not curling up in a corner. Thank you. Like, so it's awesome. So I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to double check last second questions. I don't see anything coming in. I think people have been sort of electrified. So it's been good. So I'm going to give one more reminder and then release you back into the wild. And that is, you have handouts in your panel. The assessments on student motivation, there's an observation one, and then there's the other one that you can let a student actually do so you can figure out what their real motivations are right now. And then the Edu Jedi Dictionary, which is the Learning Council's gift to everyone that's attending. It's the 200 plus definitions. It's the future Edu Jedi instructional design model, as well as the standards for digital learning experience. In draft, we want you to sort of comment back on them. But thank you guys. Thank you for being here today. Like I said, I'm going to release you back into the wild. Thank you for being who you are. And all my attendees, thanks for joining today. This has been your host, Leilani Cawthon of the Learning Council and Edu Jedi Leadership Society. See you next time, and hopefully in person when we tour through New York and New Jersey. Michael, Superintendent Salvatore, awesome. Dr. Gaskell, thank you for what you're doing. And like I said, hope to see you in person next time.
Likewise.
Bye for now, everyone.
Thank you very much. Great talking to you. Nice to meet you, Michael.
Bye. Likewise,
Okay.
you too.
Nice to meet you, Leilani. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Zspace was so great because we've worked with computers and then we've seen movies in 3D, but we've never gotten to really interact in 3D, so it's the first time you're almost a part of the actual machine.
Our goal here in Plainview was to put these machines in front of as many students as possible within this 1 year.
So when we found out about it, we all trampled each other to get towards the door so you can get on the computer first.
Put on our 3D glasses, we were just all like, wow. And we just started seeing what we can create.
And the lesson planning that went behind this, it really brings it to life. I can have kids engaged.
Our 5th grade teachers during professional development from Zspace were able to collect and put together a folder with all the lab experiences that they wanted to share. So now they have everything ready to rock and roll when they're in there with the students.
You can get a lot more done in your 42-minute period. Setting up some of these labs would be impossible in those kind of time frames, but you can walk into Zspace and have the thing saved for the students all ready to go.
Our 5th graders are working with the application called Newton's Park, and that's the same application that the AP Physics students used, was Newton's Park. So it's interesting to see how it's being used at a high school AP level and in a 5th grade level. 6th grade is using Franklin's Lab. Then they're going to go back into the tech shops and actually design their own electricity boards. Then they're going to go back to Zspace and create these electricity boards that we would never be able to afford or be able to let them do for safety reasons.
What I love about this is the collaborative approach, in the sense that I have 2 students, one with a stylus and the other student with the glasses on, being a part of that lesson, and they need to work together to problem solve.
You can see what works and what doesn't work. Everyone's learning together.
Those inquiry skills, I think, are second to none with a device like this.